Minister McKinnon, did you accept war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu flying through Canadian airspace? Did you accept war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu flying through Canadian airspace? Minister McKinnon, did you accept the war criminal going through Canadian airspace? Did you accept criminal Netanyahu flying through Canadian airspace? Minister McKinnon, did you accept that? Why didn't you stop his plane? He's wanted by the International Criminal Court.
Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on August 1st, 2026. On July 29th, our good friend Yves Engler, an author and activist who has been roundly persecuted for his defense of the Palestinian cause, continued to confront Canada's morally depraved leaders about their complicity in Israel's genocide. And what you just saw was Yves' intervention on July 29th in front of some kind of love fest for the Canadian Transport Minister, Steve McKinnon. And Yves' intervention, as you heard, related to the Canadian government's decision to allow the child murderer, Benjamin Netanyahu, to fly through Canadian airspace yet again on his way to Washington last week. It just so happens that I know Steve McKinnon personally. In fact, I've known this character for about 20 years. And for some reason, he continues to follow me on X, as he has for a long time, despite, I would say, the radical differences in our politics. In this episode, I'll explain to you what a morally bankrupt scoundrel Steve McKinnon is, but I'll also discuss far more portentous matters, including developments in the Gaza Strip and the collective West's criminal war of aggression on Iran. Before I get into it, please remember to like and share this video if you find it to be informative. And if you're not already a subscriber to our channel, please do become one. Help us to expand the reach of our unapologetic, on-the-ground resistance journalism. We are rapidly moving towards our goal of 200,000 subscribers on our 2-year anniversary, which will fall at the end of this month. So now let's get into it. I'd like to begin with the decision of the Canadian Prime Minister Goldman Sachs, also known as Mark J. Carney, to allow Netanyahu's airplane to travel through Canadian airspace yet again. Here is a post that was put out promptly after the news that Netanyahu had entered Canadian airspace by Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. By the way, this is an excellent advocacy group based in Montreal. I used to be the chair of their board, and I highly commend to those of you who are in Canada or interested in Canadian matters and the Palestinian cause to support Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. Here they posted on in the aftermath of Netanyahu's visit to Washington that for the third time in 7 months, Netanyahu had entered Canadian airspace. And they rightly note that as a signatory to the Rome Statute, Canada is obliged to enforce the ICC warrants against Netanyahu. Instead, Mark J. Carney is allowing him to circumvent justice and avoid any consequences for his war crimes and crimes against humanity. According to protocol, foreign state flights must seek permission before entering Canadian airspace, which should be submitted at least 72 hours in advance. Why does Carney continue to give safe passage to this war criminal? An excellent question, I should add. Now, the Canadian government, in the aftermath of this event, has stayed bizarrely silent as to the question of whether they gave permission to Netanyahu to enter Canadian airspace. But the Israeli government hasn't remained silent in that regard. They have stated quite clearly that they sought permission of the Canadian government. And I very much doubt that they would have entered Canadian airspace and taken a risk with the Prime Minister of Israel's freedom if they had not actually received permission. And as the Transport Minister, Steve McKinnon would have been right at the center of that very important decision, one that would have potentially significant consequences for Canada's international standing. I can't believe for one second that McKinnon didn't participate in the decision to allow Netanyahu to enter Canadian airspace yet again. It strains credulity, to put it mildly. And in fact, it stands to reason that not only McKinnon, but because of the reputational stakes and the legal stakes for Canada, the Prime Minister himself and the Foreign Minister, Anita Anand, a former law professor, they all would have been involved in this criminal decision to allow the child murderer to enter into Canadian airspace yet again. And in October of last year, the so-called prime minister stated explicitly that if Netanyahu visited Canada, Canada would arrest Netanyahu in keeping with the ICC warrant. And what this shows beyond a shadow of a doubt is not only that Mark Carney is a pathological liar, as are Steve McKinnon and the foreign minister Anita Anand, but they don't give a rat's ass about international law and about the ICC. And they're only paying lip service to it in some failed and belated effort to persuade people living in Canada and elsewhere in the West that the government of our country and other Western countries actually attaches weight to humanitarian law in their decision making. So how is it that I know Steve McKinnon personally? Well, this is a story that goes back 20 years. Back in around 2006, 2007, I was a partner in a class actions law firm based in the province of Ontario, Canada, known as Siskins. And I had 4 other partners in that department. Our firm was much larger than that. We had about 25 partners, but the ones who actually ran the class actions department, which was probably the most important part of the firm in terms of revenue and in terms of the nature and quality of the cases that we pursued, we had 5 partners, and I was one of those partners. And another one of those partners was a guy by the name of Mike Azinga. Mike Azinga, who is no longer doing plaintiff side class actions work, he switched and went to the other side and became a Bay Street lawyer representing the ultra wealthy and Canadian corporations at a firm called Bennett Jones. And at the time that he was a partner at Siskins, he and I had, I think it's fair to say, rather divergent politics, because he, for part of the time that I was a partner there, was the president of the Liberal Party of Canada. And he was a president of the Liberal Party of Canada at the time that the Liberal Party was in power under a radical neoliberal and neocon by the name of Paul Martin, who was a former CEO of a Canadian shipping company. In any case, because he was my partner in a relatively small group of class actions partners, I thought it wise, as did others in the partnership, to try to maintain a cordial relationship with all the partners, even if we didn't see eye to eye on politics. And in 2007, when Barack Obama was running to be the nominee of the Democratic Party in the 2008 election, I made a decision on my own at a time that I was very busy with my class actions practice, because I was so inspired by Obama's campaign, to go down to Indiana and to canvass for him in predominantly African-American neighborhoods, to canvass for the Obama campaign in the Indiana primary. At that point in time, it was really down to Obama or Hillary Clinton, and I was decidedly on the side of Obama. I'm not an American citizen. I didn't have the right to vote. Nobody compensated me a dime to volunteer for the Obama campaign in Indiana, and I didn't have any of my expenses reimbursed to me. I traveled all the way by car from Southern Ontario to Indianapolis to assist with the campaign. I was down there for about a week. Obama ended up winning the Indiana primary and the nomination, as everybody knows. And then we get to the presidential election, when Obama was running against McCain, the Republican nominee. And on the weekend before the election, I was invited by Michael Azinga to go down to Pittsburgh. He had heard about my excursion to Indiana, and I think that kind of put an idea in his head. Maybe we should put a group of Canadians together to go down to Pittsburgh and canvass for the Obama campaign, and I did. I joined that group, and Steve McKinnon was one of the people in that group. And so too was a very good friend of mine by the name of Atul Bal, a very dear friend of mine, who later became my chief strategist in my campaign for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada in 2020. And after we returned to Canada from Pittsburgh on the weekend before the 2008 presidential election in the United States, Michael Izinga, the former president of the Liberal Party, authored a an article for the Ottawa Citizen. That is the major newspaper in the capital of Canada. And the article was entitled Baruch's Canucks, the sequel. And as you can see here in the upper right-hand corner, this was published on November 9th, 2008, is a picture of me and my good friend Atul sitting on a sidewalk in Pittsburgh, taking a break from canvassing for the Obama campaign. And you can see in front of Atul there at his feet, there are small posters and pamphlets featuring Mr. Hope and Change, Barack Obama himself. And in the left-hand side here of this article, highlighted in light blue, you can see during the next 24 hours, a small band of friends will arrive from Ontario to help the Obama campaign. Dimitri Lascaris is a Green Party activist. Atul Bal works for the NDP, that's Canada's nominally Social Democratic Party, the New Democratic Party. Steve McKinnon is past national director of the Liberal Party. I am its former president. And Izinga went on to explain what happened during that weekend in Pittsburgh. Now, one thing that Izinga omitted to mention in this article is that, yes, Steve McKinnon had been a past national director of the Liberal Party of Canada, which has governed Canada federally for most of the post-World War II period. But at the particular time when we went down to Pittsburgh, he had left politics for a time and was working for a lucrative lobbying firm by the name of Hill and Knowlton, and was using his connections in politics in order to, advance the interests of his corporate clients and enrich himself in the process. And some years afterwards, he decided to become a candidate for the Liberal Party, and eventually ascended to the position of the transport minister. I have a feeling that McKinnon harbors considerably more ambitious goals than the transportation portfolio. But putting that aside, what else do I know about Steve McKinnon? Well, this is really the main experience I had of him personally. It was sometime after we all went down to Pittsburgh. And at that point, let me be candid, I was operating under the delusion that Barack Obama was actually a principled, humanitarian, compassionate, anti-war candidate. And we found out very quickly, very, very quickly after he won that election, that in fact he was a complete and utter fraud. And it wasn't, it took me no less than 3 months following my trip to Pittsburgh with these persons to come to that conclusion. And I was, by the time he entered the office of the presidency in January 2009, I was criticizing Obama quite vigorously on social media. It had become clear by that point in time, as I say, that he was a total fraud. In any case, after we went to Pittsburgh, Izinga, he purchased some posh villa in the island, the Caribbean island of St. Martin, and he invited me and my wife to go down and join several other people for a weekend at his villa. And being a good partner, a law partner of his, I decided to accept the invitation. Also, frankly, was happy to take a break and go to St. Martin. But while I was down there, I had the opportunity yet again to see and meet with Steve McKinnon. He was one of the persons who had been invited down to Izinga's villa for this this weekend. And I'll never forget this. It stayed with me from the moment it happened. I can remember it clear as day. One night at Izinga's posh villa in St. Martin, we were sitting down having dinner, and right across from me was McKinnon and Izinga. And one of them looked over at me as we were having dinner and said to me, "Hey, Dimitri, I can't understand why you are involved with the Green Party." And I found this question to be quite curious, because I expected that it would be obvious why I was involved with the Green Party, but I responded immediately and honestly as follows. I said, the reason I'm with the Green Party is because of all the parties that are in Canada's parliament, it is the one whose core values most closely align with my own. I may not agree with everything the Green Party does and says, but it is the one that I feel most comfortable with from the perspective of principle. And at that point, they kind of looked at each other, looked at me, thought my answer was kind of bizarre, judging from their expressions. And then I decided to ask them. I said, why are you so active in and committed to the Liberal Party? And without, blinking an eye, they both gave the same answer. And the answer was, because we win. That was their answer. Had nothing to do with values, had nothing to do with principles. It was all about power. And they made absolutely no bones about the fact that it was all about power. They didn't feel even remotely ashamed, as far as I could tell, to answer my question in that way. And that pretty much defines who the Liberals are, especially the power brokers in the Liberal Party. These people don't give a rat's ass about human rights, about genocide, about racism, about conquest, about violations of the United Nations Charter, about equality, about compassion, about human decency. All they care about is power. And frankly, they're pretty damn good at acquiring it in our compromised political and economic system. The Liberal Party of Canada has mastered the art of deceiving Canadians into believing that they are progressive and principled. And it's about time that we as Canadians dispense with that delusion and understand that these people are, like Steve McKinnon, like Mark Carney, like Anita Anand, genocidal racists. Every single one of you motherfuckers. And if you don't like it, sue me. Sue me. I will take that argument to court and fight you any day in a legal environment in order to establish beyond a shadow of a doubt that you people have absolutely no decency whatsoever. If you did, you never would have allowed that child murdering lunatic from Tel Aviv to enter Canadian airspace once, let alone 3 times. So with that, I would like to turn now to much more important matters, and specifically the criminal Western war on Iran. More and more corporate media outlets report that the psychopathic madman in the White House is about to launch a devastating set of strikes on Iran. And by the way, how many times have we heard this before? How many threats of existential doom has the Donald uttered at Iran? And has any of those threats actually resulted in Iran capitulating or making serious concessions that it otherwise would not have been inclined to make? No, there's no reason to believe that any of this is effective. And my own view is the more and more that Trump resorts to these kinds of blood-curdling threats, the more I believe he's not doing it because he believes it's going to change anything, although he's stupid enough to actually believe that. But I think I incline more to the view that the reason he does it is because he wants to please the more bloodthirsty members of his constituency, the MAGA movement. And there are a lot of, not all, but a lot of people in the MAGA movement who love that sort of thing. They love to hear threats of mass destruction and murder and destroying an economy and, sending a state into a state of oblivion. And I think, frankly, he's playing to his base. It's just so difficult to believe that he actually thinks any of these threats are going to enable him to bring about the surrender of Iran. In any case, the latest corporate media outlet to report that Trump is about to launch another devastating waves of strikes on Iran is none other than the Wall Street Journal. Here you see an article that was published in the last 24 hours. Trump orders fresh attack against Iran as war enters 6th month. And the article goes on to say that, of course, it's based on the ever-present unnamed U.S. officials. Earlier Friday, Trump told reporters, according to this article, that he planned to resume heavy military strikes to force the regime to come to the negotiating table. He predicted that if the U.S. hit Iran hard enough, the hardline regime would eventually peter out. We will be hitting them very hard, Trump said Friday at a televised cabinet meeting in Camp David. And at some point, they're going to say, we just can't take it anymore. Trump authorized the new attack plan presented to him at the presidential retreat, U.S. officials said, but they noted any immediate progress on the diplomatic front could convince Trump to halt the planned strikes and return to negotiations. He also could simply change his mind. And the article goes on to say that Trump's threats on Friday contrasted with his insistence earlier this week that, quote, very friendly negotiations were underway, enabling a pause on military operations. Since then, Iran launched a, quote unquote, surprise attack on troops in Jordan, triggering a U.S. retaliatory attack on Wednesday. Of course, the Wall Street Journal doesn't mention that when Iran launched that so-called surprise attack, it was actually being subjected to economic warfare. And I'm talking not only about the sanctions, but about the illegal blockade on Iranian ports, which is an act of war. Also, it doesn't mention in the Wall Street Journal that Trump was violating from the outset of the Memorandum of Understanding every single one of its provisions virtually, nor does it mention that Trump has bombed Iran repeatedly prior to this so-called surprise attack in the Strait of Hormuz, which the Trump regime was trying unsuccessfully to take control of over the prior several months. So in any case, we've heard this song and dance before. As of the time that I began this report, I had not seen, I was looking for any indication that this next wave of criminal attacks had begun. Hopefully they won't happen. Hopefully Trump will chicken out again, as he has so often in the past. But there is every possibility that we're about to witness a yet another escalation at the hands of the Trump regime. And consistently with the tone and content of the article from the Wall Street Journal, embassies throughout West Asia, U.S. embassy have issued dire warnings. Here is a security alert issued today by the U.S. mission in Saudi Arabia. It is a worldwide caution. The Department of State advised Americans worldwide to exercise increased caution. And you can see also that the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait issued the same notice today, as did, interestingly, and these aren't the only notices in West Asia issued by U.S. embassies. There's a whole range of them. I'm just showing you three. But there was also such a notice issued by the U.S. Embassy in Egypt, which I've just put up on the screen, which is interesting because, of course, as we reported 2 days ago, a U.S. LNG tanker was struck by a drone in an Egyptian port. Although the Trump regime and the Netanyahu regime would probably want you to believe that that was done by a member of the Axis of Resistance, no member of the Axis of Resistance has claimed responsibility for that attack. And in fact, the Iranian government, through its foreign ministry, is suggesting that this was a false flag, which was designed to compromise relations between Egypt and Iran, which up until this point in time, during the war of aggression, excuse me, by all appearances have seemed to be relatively stable and cordial. Egypt is a very populous country. It has a sizable military. And I'm sure there's nothing that the Americans and the Israelis would love than to see Egypt become hostile to Iran and to enter the battle with its own military forces and sacrifice its own soldiers in order to try to neutralize Iran. Now, other U.S. corporate media have put out some rather interesting reports about this disastrous war on Iran that was launched by Trump and Netanyahu on February 28th of this year. Here you can see a report, the headline of a report published by the New York Times within the last 24 hours, authored by longtime New York Times columnist Stephen Erlanger. Title is, "In Iran, the U.S. appears headed for a strategic defeat. With none of President Trump's aims accomplished and the Strait of Hormuz closed, U.S. allies see dysfunction and vulnerability from the war." And the body of the article states the allies of the United States worry that the inability of the U.S. to turn military superiority, what military superiority are they talking about exactly? Their air defense systems seem utterly incapable of stopping Iran's ballistic missiles and drones. And they have failed miserably to take control of the Strait of Hormuz, which was completely open to maritime traffic prior to this war of aggression. Iran retains its enriched uranium, despite all the bombing of its nuclear facilities. Iran's missile capabilities remain intact, despite all the bombing of missile sites and launchers. So I think it's rather generous for the New York Times to characterize the United States military as being in a position of superiority to the Iranian military, despite the fact that the Iranian military's budget is a tiny little fraction of the gigantic U.S. military budget. Now, the article goes on. Erlinger writes, for the moment, Iran is seemingly resolute. I've been there during the war twice, and I can tell you that it isn't seemingly their resolution. It is very, very real. And whether the government is more radical or not, listen, there's nothing more radical than a genocidal, child-murdering, pedophile regime such as you have in place in the United States and in all, or at least some, major Western countries. That's where you are to find the real and the most dangerous radicals in the world today, in the halls of power in the West. And it says the war has left both the United States and Israel in weaker positions. That's true. And blaming each other for the mess. Iranian missiles and drones not only restrict traffic through the strait and damage the economic infrastructure of allied energy production, but they also continue to threaten American bases across the Middle East. And this article goes on to quote people from major Western think tanks like Chatham House to the effect that there is a lot of consternation amongst the so-called allies of Washington as a result of the inability of the Trump regime to achieve any of its objectives after 5 to 6 months of absolutely devastating and extremely costly warfare. And on top of the New York Times piece, there's also this doozy from the Washington Post, which was published today on August 1st. U.S. general warns Pentagon he lacks sufficient forces to protect Israel. And the general in question, his name is Alexis Grinkovich. He's the top U.S. commander in Europe. He has warned the Pentagon that he no longer has enough Navy destroyers to keep protecting Israel from Iranian ballistic missile attacks, while also meeting U.S. defense needs. The destroyers, which have intercepted missiles targeting Israel, are stretched by operations in the Mediterranean, Red Sea, and around Iran, while maintenance issues have further reduced availability. And by the way, maintenance is something that doesn't get nearly enough coverage in the media. There is a lot of wear and tear on these military assets, whether you're talking about transportation aircraft used by the U.S. Air Force. You're talking about refuelers, F-35s, F-15s, A-10 aircraft, whatever the military asset may be. It experiences considerable wear and tear during an intense and protracted conflict like this, particularly in the environmental conditions prevailing in West Asia at this particular time. Extreme heat, extreme humidity. And so a lot of this military hardware, despite the enormous sums of money that Americans pay for it, has to be taken offline for extended periods of time in order to be maintained. And that's even in cases where it isn't actually damaged by incoming missile or drone fire. It still has to go offline for significant periods of time to be maintained. Any of this military hardware is going to have to be removed from the battlefield for maintenance for extended and repeated periods of time. And the more the war goes on, and the longer it goes on, and the more intense it becomes, the more amount of time will be spent maintaining, repairing, and removing from the theater of battle these expensive military assets. And so, by all indications, and this is just one of them, Israel is becoming increasingly vulnerable. Another major source of vulnerability for Israel is that over time, the Iranian aerospace forces have very effectively degraded the layers of air defense that the U.S. has established in West Asia, starting with the Persian Gulf, then Saudi Arabia, then Jordan, for the protection of Israel. The Iranians have been very skillful in destroying radar, long-range radar systems, and also air interceptor launchers, and forcing Israel to become more and more reliant upon its own rather ineffective air defense systems. So this is an article that should be taken quite seriously for those who don't want to see the destruction of Israel. That is exactly the trajectory that the genocidal entity is on, should we continue down the path of war. Now, another interesting development is that the Pentagon has mysteriously raised the casualty figures for the U.S. military again. The U.S. Department of War increased the number of American soldiers injured in operations related to the war against Iran by 32 people in one day in the updates of the casualty statistics of its overseas operations, which you see up here on the screen. The latest statistics published in the official system affiliated with the U.S. Ministry of War, the Defense Manpower Data Center, showed the number of injured people as 236 until July 30th. But this figure has increased to 268 people in the statistics of July 31st. More satellite imagery has also emerged with respect to Saudi Arabia's Aramco facility in Jazan. This is one of the most sophisticated oil refineries in the world, we were told, and it was attacked by Yemeni drones and missiles a little more than a week ago. And what this satellite image shows is that three oil storage tanks were completely destroyed. You can see this indicated here with the black spots and the darkened spots and the red arrows. And two additional tanks sustained significant damage. And one Horton sphere was completely destroyed. If you're wondering what a Horton sphere is, it's a spherical pressure vessel which is used for industrial scale storage of liquefied gases. And the types of materials it can store include liquefied petroleum gas, liquefied natural gas, and anhydrous ammonia. Now, by the way, this is my daily reminder that the Saudi crown prince had a bromance with the notorious Zionist pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. And I mention this only to remind people of the level of the Saudi autocracy's depravity. You can see here, this is from November 2016, well after this animal, Epstein, was convicted for criminal offenses relating to the sexual exploitation of a minor. And it was well known throughout the world that he was a depraved pedophile. You can see how affectionate the crown prince of Saudi Arabia was with this monster. And that is, I think, as powerful an indication as any of what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the Saudi dictatorship. Now, in related news, a video has emerged which purports to show a massive fire at an oil refinery in Erbil, Iraq, and here is that video. Now, it's unclear what caused the blaze at this refinery, but it certainly does not bode well, this development, for the ability of the U.S. military to protect oil infrastructure in the many Arab countries that it currently occupies, one of them being, of course, Iraq. In addition, within the past 24 hours, Kuwait reported that it was under a drone attack. And here you can see a notice put out in Arabic and English. The Kuwaiti air defenses are currently responding to hostile drone threats. The General Staff of the Kuwaiti Armed Forces confirms that any explosions that may be heard are the result of air defense systems intercepting hostile targets. The public is urged to adhere to safety and security instructions issued by the relevant authorities. So they're telling you in advance, before the attack is over, that if you hear an explosion, it's not because the drone or missile actually struck a target on the ground. It's because it was blown up in midair. Nothing but bullocks here, folks. The Kuwaiti air defenses have been proven by video and satellite imagery to have been largely ineffective in preventing attacks from Iran's aerospace forces. And the other, and probably the most important aspect of this particular announcement, is that it shows that the Iranian military is not waiting to be struck again before it hits U.S. military bases in the region. It has clearly seized the initiative which is precisely what it should do. It is not allowing the United States to dictate when the hostilities will resume and when they will be paused. If the Iranian military were allowed the United States to dictate the resumption and suspension of hostilities, then the hostilities would be suspended and resumed only when it is in the U.S. interests that they be suspended or resumed. You have to actually hit the United States when it doesn't want to be engaged in a hot war. That is the moment when it is most vulnerable. And I think that the Iranian military has clearly come to that conclusion, and also has come to the conclusion, which is entirely correct, that in order for it to prevail, ultimately it will have to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz and will have to restrict considerably traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, in that regard, I just want to mention that I saw recently a CENTCOM announcement. They were issuing one of their fact-check announcements where they purport to be correcting the record. And they said, the Strait of Hormuz is actually opened, and thousands of vessels have gone through the Strait of Hormuz. That's what they said. Thousands of vessels in the last 4 months. 4 months, okay? So the average daily number of vessels passing through the Strait of Hormuz before this criminal war was 130 to 140. Over a 4-month period, if you figure that the average was about 135 vessels a day, that's more than 16,000 vessels. So what do they mean by thousands of vessels went through the Strait of Hormuz during that period? Does that mean 3,000? Does that mean 4,000? Okay, let's say it's 4,000. That's 25%, less than 25% of the pre-war traffic. And furthermore, they're not providing any evidence that thousands of vessels managed to go through the Strait of Hormuz during this period. But whatever the number may be, it's very clear that Iran has dramatically reduced all the independent sources of information about, credible, reputable, independent sources of information about what is going through the Strait of Hormuz are in agreement that the amount of traffic has been drastically reduced, and that even though the Strait of Hormuz may be technically opened, there has been a severe reduction in the quantity of oil and gas and other essential commodities that are exiting through the Strait of Hormuz, and that continues right up until today. The real question, frankly, is not whether the Strait of Hormuz is quote unquote opened or whether it's closed. The real question is how much traffic is getting through, and how does that compare to the needs of the global economy and the levels of traffic we were seeing before the war. That's the real question. So don't get, please, distracted by talk about whether the strait is open or closed. Now, one other item I want to mention in terms of the oil industry is that while the West Asian oil industries are suffering enormously from this criminal war of aggression, U.S. oil and gas producers are quite literally corking open the champagne. And here is an article published on July 30th by Common Dreams. Shell profits more than double as Iran war pushes up gas prices. And it goes on to say that the London-based behemoth Shell has reported its net profit more than doubled in the second quarter compared to the same period in 2025 as the Iran war pushed up energy prices. Oxfam projected earlier this week that the world's 6 largest fossil fuel corporations, Shell among them, would double their combined profit in the second quarter of 2026. Double. They already had obscene profits. And the humanitarian group also found that, quote, the emissions from BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell, and Total Energies were sufficient to cause around 1 in 4 heat waves reported globally between 2000 and 2023, heat waves that would have been virtually impossible without human-made climate change. Quote, these profits have been built on an energy crisis that's left households across the country struggling with high energy bills at home and expensive fuel at the pumps. This is from Danny Gross, energy campaigner at Friends of the Earth. Now, 2 things I want to note about this development. It's not at all surprising that the profits of these Western oil companies are soaring. But, oftentimes it's said because of this development that, these countries, the United States and Britain and the Netherlands, where these huge Western oil majors are situated, that they are profiting from the war on Iran. Well, that's not the countries that are profiting. It's the oil companies that are profiting. And, a lot of those profits are coming from the citizens of their own countries. Americans are paying a lot more for oil and gas. So too are Europeans. And so what we're effectively seeing here is a wealth transfer from ordinary citizens, workers, the middle class, the poor. There's a wealth transfer from those people to these huge oil and gas corporations and the billionaires who control them. That's what's actually happening. So America is not profiting from this war. What is happening is that the oligarchy is profiting from this war, not just the oil oligarchs, but also the military industrial oligarchs, the billionaires who control the major weapons manufacturers and the intelligence companies and the artificial intelligence corporations. They are the ones who are profiting from this war. The vast bulk of the population in Western countries, including the United States, are being hurt by it considerably, and the degree to which they are being prejudiced will only grow over time. The other thing I want to mention about this article is not something that we talk about often enough, is that these wars in West Asia and Ukraine, and the war on Russia, and the intensive activity of the criminal United States military in the Caribbean Sea, in Latin America, this is creating enormous contaminants for the environment. All of these fires that you see at oil refineries and oil depots, all of these bombs exploding, all of these buildings being burnt to the ground, these acts of terror perpetrated by the West and its proxies are causing an absolute avalanche of contaminants, many carcinogens, for example, to be, to inundate the environment, and not to mention unexploded munitions. And so therefore, there is absolutely enormous negative environmental impacts from these wars, on top of the lives that are being lost, the futures that are being destroyed, the monies that are being transferred from socially beneficial purposes to enriching the military-industrial complex. The damage that's being done to the environment by all of these wars is going to have profoundly negative impacts on generations of human beings to come all over the world, which is one of the most compelling reasons for which we have to bring these imperialistic wars to an end as quickly as possible. Now, with that, I'd like to close out my report to talking about a major development in the Gaza Strip. Trump's so-called Board of Peace has announced the finalization of what it describes as a major advance in negotiations with Palestinian resistance groups in the Gaza Strip. And they are calling this plan the roadmap for completing the implementation of President Trump's comprehensive peace plan in Gaza. What you're looking at here is a post on X that was put out within the last few days by the X account of the Board of Peace, this fraudulent entity that was set up by Trump to conceal the fact that Israel is continuing to perpetrate a genocide in Gaza. And let's go through this in some detail, because it's important to understand what it is that the resistance has actually agreed to, and to dispel all of the mythology that the Zionist lobby groups and the Israeli government are putting out about the actual terms of this plan. So let's begin with Article 1, or Principle 1, I suppose. It reads as follows: all parties reaffirm their commitment to President Trump's comprehensive plan to achieve peace, which constitutes, together with UN Security Council Resolution 2803, the agreed-upon international framework guiding the implementation of this process. Through this process, the parties aim at ending the cycle of destruction, securing the complete Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, restoring normal life, enabling Palestinian governance, reconstruction, security, recovery, and economic development, rehabilitating damaged sectors, and facilitate launching a credible political path that achieves self-determination and statehood. Okay, why am I putting the emphasis on this language? Because this is everything that the resistance has been demanding, but that Israel has fanatically refused to allow any of this. It's not allowing a return to normal life. It's not withdrawing from the Gaza Strip. In fact, it's encroaching more and more on the little part of the territory that remains within nominal control of the resistance. It is not enabling the reconstruction or allowing it, or Palestinian self-governance, no recovery and economic development, no rehabilitation of damaged sectors. So the very first principle under this plan calls for Israel to do a whole bunch of things that it has absolutely refused to do, both in word and in action, from the very day that this Board of Peace was created. Then let's go on to the next section. This is principle 2. Israel shall fully complete without delay all remaining commitments under Sharm Sheikh Protocol, particularly the cessation of military operations as detailed in Annex 1. Well, they're killing people every day, and they have been from the beginning of this travesty. Then it says, Hamas and the Palestinian faction shall complete the cessation of all military operations they already have months ago. In parallel, the timetable and implementation mechanisms of this roadmap shall be prepared within 14 days after all parties approve the roadmap. I'll come back to that in a second. Is Israel going to actually approve this roadmap, which could be extended by a decision by the International Verification Committee? Upon the completion of the timetable and implementation mechanisms, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, or the NCAG, shall enter the Strip and start to assume its responsibilities. This is an all-Palestinian governance board. Let's be very clear about that. And then it says that the progression from one phase to the following one shall be contingent on the verified completion of the commitments of the previous phase. This verification shall be done by the International Verification Committee, which shall also observe any violations by either party through an enhanced monitoring mechanism. Okay, then we go on. Principle 4, Hamas and other factions agree that all civilian governance security functions in Gaza shall be handed over to, this is the National Committee of Governance in accordance with President Trump's plan. They also assert that NCAG shall enjoy full independence in carrying out its responsibilities, and the faction shall not interfere in NCAG affairs during the transitional period. Upon fully assuming its responsibilities in Gaza, the NCAG shall maintain the continuity of civilian institutions and public services. I mean, those have been basically destroyed, and Israel continues to degrade them every day. It then says all civil servants shall be treated lawfully, fairly, and with dignity with respect to their rights. With international support, NCAG shall carry out a comprehensive audit of the financial administrative affairs in Gaza and protect, recover, and administer public assets and resources. So the Palestinian resistance groups have agreed to this, which shows you the degree to which they are prepared to be transparent. And they are prepared to allow an independent group of Palestinian technocrats to take control of Gaza. They put it in writing, and there's no indication that they are not serious about meeting their commitments. And at the bottom here, it says NCAG shall seek to assess legitimate commitments to suppliers, contractors, and other parties up to a total amount of no more than 400 million USD. I don't know where that number comes from, but I can tell you that it is grotesquely inadequate to meet the needs of the Palestinian people. Then it continues, and at Principle 8, a process to decommission and store heavy weapons, military production sites, depots of weapons, and tunnels shall begin after completing the remaining commitments under Sharm Sheikh Protocol, the entry of NCAG, and the deployment of the International Stabilization Force. So the process of disarmament will only begin after Israel has complied with that agreement, which requires it to withdraw from Gaza and to allow, I believe the number is 500 trucks of humanitarian aid into Gaza per day. It's not even come close to that at any point during this so-called ceasefire and peace process. And the process, according to this, the process of disarmament or decommissioning, it's not disarmament, it's decommissioning, shall be administered and implemented by NCAG in a gradual, sequential, and time-bound manner according to an implementation timetable that shall be completed within 14 days after all parties approve. This process shall be linked to an Israeli withdrawal in phases from the areas under its control in Gaza and the decommissioning of armed militias in accordance with Article 10. And the Palestinian faction shall take part in this process. And I'll show you a few more provisions of this agreement. It then talks about this plan. It says under Principle 12, the temporary international stabilization force shall be deployed in Gaza to separate Israeli forces from NCAG-controlled areas. ISF shall not perform any police mission or missions related to the Palestinian society. Furthermore, it shall monitor compliance for all parties with the ceasefire, train the Palestinian police, secure the protection and delivery of humanitarian assistance and essential supplies into the Gaza Strip. Israeli forces shall complete their phased withdrawal from Gaza Strip according to an agreed-upon timetable consistent with Article 8 of the roadmap in accordance with the Comprehensive Peace Plan. NCAG shall be responsible for handling internal security incidents. And finally, Principle 9, personal weapons in Gaza shall be subject to the regulations of relevant Palestinian laws. As the transitional authority in the Strip, NCAG shall be the sole authority to register weapons, issue and revoke licenses, and enforce the law, including through reintegration and social support. Weapons of the militias, this is Principle 10, shall be decommissioned and stored under NCAG authority according to an agreed-upon timetable. Members of those militias shall not be integrated in the security and police services. So what's going on here, frankly, and it's very clear from this agreement, is that, first of all, the Palestinian resistance is not agreeing to disarm before Israel has completely withdrawn from the Gaza Strip. That's the first thing. The second thing is Israel has to comply with other key provisions of the so-called ceasefire agreement that it has routinely and systematically violated, including the provision of adequate humanitarian aid, a reconstruction in Gaza, and allowing this independent committee of Palestinian technocrats to come in and assume control. It has not done any of those things, and until it does those things, the Palestinians are not agreeing, the resistance groups, to give up their weapons to anybody. And in any event, even if Israel were to do those things, the weapons would not go to Israel. The weapons would come into the custody of the NCAG, the Palestinian Technocratic Authority. And on top of all of that, the plan, as I indicated at the very outset when I was reading to you its terms, is tied to a path to the creation of a Palestinian state, which Israel fanatically rejects, is completely adamant about there being no Palestinian state anytime soon or ever. What does this all mean? This all means that this is nothing but hot air, because Israel's not going to do any of the things it's required to do under this agreement in order for this decommissioning process to begin and to be completed. So if they're telling you that Hamas and other Palestinian resistance groups have agreed to disarm, they're really lying. That's not what they've agreed to do. They've agreed, if Israel meets a whole bunch of conditions that it has violated systematically from day one, then they will gradually turn their weapons over to a Palestinian authority, which is not at all what Israel is demanding. And I think all we need to know is that the Israeli media itself is reporting this. Hebrew Channel 13. Senior Israeli officials estimate this evening that if the U.S. insists on the withdrawal of the Israeli military from the Gaza Strip before Hamas is disarmed, and that's exactly what this plan calls for, quote, we may be heading toward a direct confrontation with Washington, close quote. Well, this is nonsense, okay? They're not going to have no direct confrontation with Washington. If Washington actually tries to force them to withdraw from Gaza before the resistance groups give up their weapons, then they will do that. The problem is that Washington won't force them to do it. It will not use its leverage. Why? Not because Israel controls Washington, but because Washington wants Israel, its rabid dog in West Asia, to physically exterminate all of those who resist U.S. hegemony in the region. That's why Washington will not use its leverage to force Israel to comply with this or any other agreement. And this Channel 13 report goes on and says the claim that Israel will not retreat by even an inch before Hamas is disarmed, they claim, adding that Netanyahu, on the eve of the elections, will not agree to any withdrawal without the disarmament of the Gaza Strip. So they're not going to give up an inch unless all the weapons have been taken away from Hamas. And I assure you that the Israelis are going to say, we won't allow those weapons to be held by the Technocratic Palestinian Committee. We have to take possession of the weapons, which, of course, the resistance will never agree to. So this is just a whole lot of smoke and mirrors. And you shouldn't believe for one second that this is anything other than a cover for the continuation of the genocide in Gaza and now also in the West Bank and South Lebanon. And what I think is most remarkable about this, the resistance groups were saying for a long time that they would only turn over their weapons to a Palestinian authority once Palestine actually had a state. This is different. So what they're saying is we're prepared under certain conditions to give up our weapons to a Palestinian authority before the state of Palestine actually comes into existence, is allowed to form and become a truly sovereign entity. However, we have to be on a path to a Palestinian statehood before we will hand those weapons over. So the resistance have made a very, very significant concession here. But I think they're fully wide-eyed about this, and they understand entirely that Israel is not going to comply with any of this, and Washington will not force Israel to do so, certainly not the Trump regime. At least there's no indication that it's going to do that at this stage. And what they're doing here by agreeing to this is they're showing to the whole world that they are doing everything they can to remain flexible, and that the responsibility for the ongoing horrors in the Gaza Strip lies strictly and exclusively with the genocidal Western-backed monsters in the Israeli colony. Now, the last thing I want to show you before signing off today is something that brought a smile to my face this morning. This is a report from the Cyprus Mail. A few days ago, it was brought to my attention by a comrade in Cyprus that this billboard had been erected in Cyprus near the Larnaca airport, where there's a lot of traffic coming in and out from Israel. Huge numbers of tourists and residents of Cyprus are coming from Israel nowadays. And this was a political advertisement in Hebrew on a billboard outside the Larnaca airport. Imagine that. Have you ever seen in your own country a political advertisement, a huge billboard, a political advertisement in a language other than the official language or languages of your country relating to an election in another state? You ever seen that in your country? I've never seen that anywhere. This is the first time. Why the hell are political billboards in Hebrew popping up in what is supposed to be a sovereign independent state, Cyprus? In any case, it turns out that somebody decided to take matters into their own hands. The article says that the billboard was vandalized in Palestinian colors. I prefer to say that it was beautified. That's my report for Reason to Resist on August 1st, 2026. I wish you all well and an enjoyable first weekend of August.